I read recently about a cafe in Toronto where the owner had deliberately disconnected the internet service for his customers. Now, can you imagine the horror of having no internet in a cafe? He said he did it because he wanted his customers to have meaningful interactions rather than his store just be another commodity. Now, this is fascinating and also incredibly reassuring. And I want to tell you why. Today I want to remind you of the magic that can happen within the intersections of two crossing paths. And how these intersections, these interactions, have the potential to teach us such important lessons, to help us realize our own personal biases and insecurities, or to simply transform our life. And I also want to share with you how I don't believe that social media can achieve this same magic. I'll be talking about something called core memories. Now, you may have first heard of this term in the movie Inside Out. Sometimes, in the most unpredictable of times and places, we interact with people in such a way that a core memory is formed. And this is a powerful and important memory that we draw upon throughout our lives. I want to share with you a few of my core memories to help me explain the connection between core memories and human interaction. When I was a young boy, I attended an elementary school in a small mining town in Australia. Now, excuse the pun, but this town was the pits. It was drab, dreary, and depressing, and the only thing that really got me through was playing sport. And the sport that I loved to play was the greatest sport in the world, of course, Australian rules football. And I was delighted to learn that the school had a team in the local league. So I was looking forward to meeting my new coach, and I had visions of a tall, strapping ex-football star who was going to make me a champion. Well, the budget must have been very tight, because I learned with utter disappointment that my coach was actually one of the Catholic nuns at the school called Sister Mary. Well, my heart sank. That's the end of my football career. And all my biases about women being involved in a man's sport and what a coach should be left me in deep despair. However, in a very short time, Sister Mary proved to be the best coach that I've ever had in anything. She taught me skills that made me a better footballer, but most of all, she taught me a really important lesson that has stayed with me all through my life. You see, I was a pretty good footballer, but I was a perfectionist, and I was an awful loser. And so Sister Mary noticed this very soon, and she took me to one side and said, "Steve, you have all the talent in the world, but you're miserable. You haven't yet worked out the point of playing sport. You have to learn to play happy." Well, play happy? Yep, probably the most stupidest piece of coaching advice I'd ever received up until that point of time. But she persevered with me, and through that season she patiently taught me how to enjoy each moment of the game and not get hung up on the final score or even my own performance. I realise now that Sister Mary was way ahead of her time, because now experts call that living in the moment or living in the now. So I did what she said, and I really enjoyed my football and even won some awards. But the lessons she taught me, I use even to this day. Everything I do, I try not to worry too much about the outcome. And I really focus on what's happening right now. And I try and find joy in it. About 50 years after this experience with Sister Mary, I was fortunate enough to spend time with my daughter Millie the day before she was to run the Olympic marathon in Rio. Now, naturally, she was incredibly nervous, and I could sense that the fear of failure of competing for a country on the big stage was starting to get to her. So we had some quiet time together, and I shared with her the same lesson that Sister Mary had shared with me so many years before. The next day, she used that advice, and as you can see, she simply ran happy. She focused on each step of the race, enjoyed every moment of it, and the result took care of itself. You see, sometimes when we cross paths with people, we receive a gift that we give back to others when we cross paths again in the future. The second example I draw from my first few months of teacher training. I responded to an advertisement to become a swimming instructor for children with special needs. I met a man called Grant, and he said to me, "You'll be working with children with Down syndrome. Are you okay with that?" Well, I hesitated. Up until that point in my life, I'd never crossed paths with children with special needs. And I was ignorant. I was fearful. And I was completely unsure of myself. He sensed this and he said, "Why don't you just come down, take a look and see if it's for you?" And so I did. I turned up at the pool and there was Grant standing on the end of the pool, completely drenched. In the water were about 8 children, all with Down syndrome. So I sat down and I watched this master teacher at work. And in that half hour, I learned more about the essence of teaching that I have done ever since. He showed me how all children can respond if they're treated with compassion and patience and dignity. After a while he said, do you want to have a go? Do you want to try it? By then I was hooked. So he gave me a young boy to work with, and each time the boy did something well, he'd climb out of the pool and give me a big wet hug. Well, now I understood why Grant's clothes were drenched. But how beautiful was that? After a year or so, I took over the program from Grant, and I ended up teaching other young teachers the joys of working with children with special needs. And we all realised how they give back so much more than they receive. I'm so grateful that those children revealed to me my biases and insecurities before I started a career in education. And by crossing paths with that teacher and those amazing kids, I learned that teaching is about making a difference for all children. And that's still how I live my life as an educator. For my third and final core memory that I want to share with you, it comes from a personally challenging circumstance. Back in 2015, I was diagnosed with cancer, and I had to return back to Australia for 2 months of intensive treatment. And this was in the clinic that was located in my hometown. And I turned up at the clinic to get some pre-work done. And I saw that the clinic was full of people like me, all who had the same disease, people who were scared, very confused, and they were desperate for their treatment to be successful. I have to say it was a very confronting environment. And yet, at the end of my treatment, I realised how fortunate I was to have had that experience. You see, up until that time, I was indulging big time in self-pity and entitlement. And my sense of entitlement made me ask questions such as, why me? What have I done wrong? Why is it that I live more healthily than other people and I'm the one who gets sick? Well, cancer has an amazing way of teaching you that those questions are completely futile. And I learned my best lesson about dealing with cancer from a simple man with a very, very amazing gift. He was an older man than me. I'd say in his late 70s. His name was Roy, and he shared the same treatment cycle as I did. And each day I'd watch him at work. He'd arrive early, and he'd make sure that he spoke to everyone. Simple conversations that just took people's mind off what was to come. And that was the magic that he had. And he interacted with everyone, from people in the very late stages of cancer right down to young children who were there to support their grandmothers and grandfathers. He had no family of his own there to support him, and yet he felt no loneliness at all. Well, soon Roy and I began to get to know each other. He told me about how he worked on the railway for 15 years and how he had lost his beautiful wife some years earlier. He lived on his own and cared for himself. Well, one day I trusted Roy enough to ask him, was he worried about the treatment not working? And did he think about dying? Because those were the questions on my mind. He sat quietly and he smiled and he said, I'm so glad that I don't think about those things too much. I'm just grateful for having lived a really good life, and I'm hoping for some more good days to come. Wow, what a simple response, and yet I thought about that a lot. Now, Roy was not a particularly educated man, and yet he taught me more about perspective and pragmatism and simplicity that for all my years of education I couldn't find. He taught me that I needed to let go of my sense of entitlement. I needed to accept my situation, and I needed to feel gratitude for what I have. And that was my best approach. These days, I try and follow the advice that Roy shared with me, and I'll never forget that simple man with such a powerful message. Now, these are just some examples of how interacting with other people can transform your life. But of course, not every interaction is going to result in a core memory. They don't just happen. I think there are about 4 catalysts that need to be at work to increase your chances of creating a wonderful core memory. And I'd like to share them with you and also share some of my mild concerns about social media. The first skill that I want to, the first catalyst that I want to share with you is skills. Now, you need skills when you interact with people. These are skills such as understanding body language, such as listening attentively, and such as reflecting on what you're hearing in order to make sense of it. Now, these skills are innate to all of us. We're born with the potential, but we have to practice them in order to learn. And just like learning to read, we actually have to read. Learning to engage with people, you have to interact, and often, especially when you're young. Now, I often wonder to myself, how much does social media really develop these important skills? The second catalyst that I want to share with you is that of availability. You see, you have to be available to experience the magic when you interact with someone. You have to be available physically, you have to be available emotionally, and you definitely have to be available socially. You see, the insidious danger of social media is that it's safe. You don't have to step out of your comfort zone, really, to interact with someone physically or even emotionally. And I think we increase the opportunities for us to create core memories by interacting with people face to face. The third catalyst, I think, are values. You actually have to value interacting, and you have to value people. You have to value their wisdom, their experience, and certainly their ideas. And the other great thing about values is it opens up the possibilities and the range of people that you can actually interact with. and they help you overcome prejudice and bias. And the last catalyst really is emotional connection. All of the memories that I shared with you involved emotional connection. They can't happen without it. Now, the ironic thing is, core memory is also a term used in technology, caused by the magnetic field created when two charged wires intersect. Now, these intersections may be able to store information, but they won't store emotions. So, for all the Snapchatting, texting, Instagramming, Facebooking that we engage with, we won't create core memories because we're not engaging emotionally. We may be entertained and informed, but not transformed. So these 4 catalysts can actually save you from getting the balance between human interaction and social media all wrong. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not against social media, definitely not. But I do believe that human interaction and social media need to coexist with balance in our lives. So my message is pretty simple. Go out and find that internet cafe with no Wi-Fi and spend time engaging meaningfully with someone. Your lives will be much richer for it. And who knows, you may actually create a core memory. Core memories are so important to us. They help us to grow and thrive. They help us to be happy and get the most out of life. But most importantly, they help us to get the very best out of ourselves. Thank you so much.